What's going on, creative people? This is Creativity is an Idea podcast, a source of creativity for creative people, and I'm your host, Pyeric. I'm very happy, and I want you to stay tuned because it's going to be a banger. It's all about creative people sharing their ideas, their challenges, their setbacks, and changes that led to their growth. It's going to be amazing, and stay tuned and see what happens. Creative person like you. What's going on, creative people? This is Creativity is an Idea podcast, and I am your host, Pyeric. I'm very pleased to present to you today's guest, Carlos Robson. He's a poet. He's a doctor. Sorry, Dr. Carlos Robson. I forgot. Drop out to doctor.
There you go.
Yeah, I forgot to add the doctor. Forgive me. He's a doctor too. So he is going to introduce himself to us. He's going to talk about what he does. So stay tuned and watch or listen to what Carlos Robson has to say. Dr. Carlos Robson has to say. Forgive me, man.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. So Carlos, we're going to talk about yourself, what you do, what you've been through, and how you managed or how you ended up doing what you're doing now. Giving speech at school. What's the name? What's the word for it? Tell me.
A commencement speech.
A commencement speech.
Right.
So, who are you, Carlos?
You want the long story?
Short,
Starting at the
long,
beginning?
how you can shorten it, middle part.
I'm a kid from Tampa, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to North Carolina when I was 10.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to a small one-stoplight town in western North Carolina with my parents and my brother, which was a really interesting change, kind of culture shock to go from a major metropolitan area to a town with one stoplight and only a couple thousand people who live there year-round. And then I came to Charlotte to go to college, and while I was at college, I found spoken word poetry, performance poetry, slam poetry. People call it all kinds of different things. But I found it through a dance class, actually, and I've been rocking with it ever since.
But were you trying to dance?
I was a dance minor. So this was a few pounds ago. And,
Many hamburgers ago.
Yes, many hamburgers ago. And I wasn't a bad dancer. I was just taller than everybody else. So a lot of times I wasn't in pieces where I was one of a number of dancers who were all the same. I was always either singled out or I ended up sort of just being maybe more on the choreography side.
Mm-hmm.
And I like dance. I still like movement. I think movement has so much more to do with what I do now than people expect or can predict. But yeah, I started off as a dancer in college.
Wow.
Sounds crazy as hell.
Hey. It doesn't sound crazy. I'll tell you something later, off camera, off record. Someone also was a dancer, break dancer. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Video too. Yeah, you will see him on YouTube.
Right. So for the record, we know each other from working together in retail for the last about a year.
For a year now. You just sent me my my first year anniversary. This is the first time I've held a job for 1 year. I'm surprised, guys. I'm surprised. Anyway, let's put that aside.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me, I've known you for a year now, and before I started working with you, I saw you walking around at Amli's.
Oh, yeah,
I take
yeah.
recognition of people.
Yeah.
So, let me ask you, how was your childhood like?
My childhood was pretty cool, man. I like I say, I born in Tampa, Florida. I lived there till I was 10, and kind of a regular middle class upbringing. I had a really interesting. I think a lot of people in my family are good storytellers. Both my grandmothers, very good storytellers. Matter of fact, one of my grandmothers, when I was really little, took me to the library, to the public library, to watch a woman who toured around the country and told stories. She told like folk tales. And it wasn't until and we bought a cassette or 2 cassettes, or I think we went to see her a couple of times. And I would listen to those cassettes over and over and over. And it probably wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I remembered that this had happened, that my grandmother took me to see this woman. Her name was Jackie Torrance.
I remember the name.
And looked her up, found out that she was from Salisbury, North Carolina. And she was known all over the region, but all over the country. And she toured around public places and told stories. And in so many ways, that's what I do now. So I think in a lot of ways, my upbringing had to do with recounting stories. And even that was the way that I connected with some people. I love film now because film is storytelling. Mm-hmm. And, I understand films and understand stories because of the way that my mother reacted to films and the way that my father reacted to films. My dad, when I look back on all of the films that I love so much, so many of them are movies that my dad put me onto. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't think of my dad as being a storyteller person or a person that I understand stories through or for. My mother's a good storyteller. But I have a lot of understanding of interactions and understanding of character, and these movies that took such a huge importance in my life growing up. A lot of them were suggested to me or by my dad, or my dad would sit us down and say, watch this and watch this part and pay attention to this. And I think I get, I absorbed all that. And
wow. That is a good upbringing,
Yeah, I didn't really talk about my upbringing, but,
Yeah. Like introducing something to what you do.
Yeah, totally.
It helps. So let me ask you, growing up and even now, what event would you never forget?
Personally or professionally or either or?
Either way.
Messing stuff up here. That's a good question. If I'm here because I'm an artist, I should give you an answer that has to do with my art. The thing that first comes to mind, I'm sure something else will come to mind in a minute. The thing that first comes to mind is I started out in college writing these little poems, as we called them then. Mm-hmm. We still call them poems, but I think of them more as performance pieces. And you go to these competitions, right? Local competitions where you compete by yourself against others. And if you do well, they invite you back after 10 months to compete for a space on a team. And then if you make the team, then you go to local competitions, statewide competitions, regional competitions, national competitions. And we went to a regional competition. There were, 20 or 30 some teams. I couldn't tell you. And we made it to the last 4 teams, right? So the thing goes on 3 or 4 days, and we were never eliminated. We kept making it further and further. And on that last night, we only get a couple of times. We only get, I think, 4 chances to perform poems among the team. Mm-hmm. And my coach, Blues, who started off as a mentor and is now one of my closest friends, he came to me and said, "You're going to do one of these poems," And I kept thinking, there's got to be something better than this thing I have, But he chose me to represent the team in one of those slots by myself. And I think I knew I was effective before that moment. I didn't know that you could bet on me, And that was one of the biggest things, still to this day, one of the most important moments in my career. And 2 months later, he did the same thing at the national competition, and we won. We won the national competition, which is a bigger competition, and it's much more important, and people pay more attention to it. But that wasn't the moment for me. The moment for me was when he came to me at the regional championship and said, "This is what you're going to do." Gave me his famous pep talk. That was it.
That was it. Wow, he believed in you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, tell me, or tell your audience. Sip. Is that coffee?
It is iced coffee. Or it was iced. Now it's just
All right.
watered down.
So tell me, or tell your audience, how or when did you decide to do what you to start doing these performance pieces?
That's a good question. I think the decision was made. It's interesting. When I was in high school, Russell Simmons had created Deaf Poetry, which came on HBO on Friday nights at midnight, I think, or something, 10 o'clock or whatever. And that had been created based on the success of deaf comedy, which was huge years before. We didn't have HBO, but I remember one time, I think my parents and my brother and I, maybe we were going, like, for the weekend, we were touring colleges, or maybe we just, like, went to Atlanta for the weekend or something, but we were staying in a hotel room. My parents were in one room, my brother and I were in another room, and Deaf Poetry came on. And I had sort of known that it existed out there in the world, but I'd never seen it. And I watched that episode glued to the TV. And my brother was, of course, please can we watch something else? Because he couldn't care less. But I remembered realizing its power, And I had been very, very peripherally aware, of spoken word before that, right? Not in the 1950s black beret snapping in a coffee shop kind of way, but in a more modern way. I had seen the movie Slam with Saul Williams. Here and there I had touched on this spoken word thing, but that was the first time I'd ever seen it showcased like that. And then a year later I was in college. A year after that, I think my freshman year in college, there was a kid who lived on my floor. His name was Jamar Williams. He was from Neptune, New Jersey. You probably can't find him now because I think he's in the FBI, for real. But we would, for months, every day, we'd walk to the dining hall together because it was kind of a hike from our building. And he said he was in a class with a guy who did spoken word. And the more he told me about it, the more I thought, and I told him out loud, I've always wanted to do that. And I said, get the info, get the place, get the whatever. And nothing ever came of it. And then sophomore year, I was in a hip-hop dance class, given an assignment to write a poem or a rap. I did not do the assignment until the night before it was due. And everybody else had been working and crafting it and rewriting, and I didn't do a damn thing until about 12 hours before I was supposed to present it in front of other people. And I just wrote a poem. And it was cute and kind of cheeky, and it didn't amount to much. It was literally about how I didn't know what I wanted to write about. It was kind of smart-ass poem, kind of shallow. But they loved it.
They loved it.
And my professor at the time, Donnell Steins, shout out to Donnell Steins, was so encouraging. Like I almost get sentimental now thinking about how encouraging she was when she thought I was the least bit talented at this thing, Maybe because she knew I had no career as a dancer. I don't know. But she was, man. She's still, every time I see her, she still shows me so much love and tells me how proud she is of me, and she's, one of those people that got me here, So from there, I went looking for an open mic. No. From there, I went to a slam. And I showed up to the slam with one or two poems. My friend Jamal Cowan and I met on campus, and we were doing poems, and then we showed up to a slam, a competition. A slam is a competition. And I think I had maybe one or two poems that were okay. And I thought I was going to show up and win the whole thing. And I showed up late, and I couldn't sign up, so I had to watch. And when I watched, I realized how good everybody was. And Blues, who is now in charge of all the competitions in the city, at the time, he wasn't yet in charge of the competitions, but he showed up.
Is it the guy with dreads?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen him around.
He's amazing. Yeah. And he showed up and handed out flyers for a new open mic he was going to start.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to that open mic the very first week, and I think I watched 1 week, and then I performed the next week or something along those lines. And you know,
It went from there.
it went from there.
That is so good. That's so good. So another thing is like we all look up to something or we see something as an icon.
Mm-hmm.
So now or in the past, what did you really or what do you look up to as your icon? Who or what?
I think spoken word is interesting for a couple of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a door for everything else in a lot of the same ways that stand-up comedy is. A lot of guys will get into stand-up comedy and they become writers on a sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys get into and they become the writers of a sitcom. They understand the characters. They understand how to create. You know, Ray Romano, Jerry Seinfeld, all these guys created sitcoms from their stand-up comedy. Other guys do stand-up comedy and they just understand the way that jokes work. They understand the mechanics of a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And so they end up in a career as the guy in the writer's room of a sitcom that just understands exactly how to make the joke work when the joke doesn't work. Some guys end up helping Conan O'Brien write a monologue every night. Spoken word, I think, is like that in a lot of ways. Spoken word is not as popular yet or hasn't been around in an established setting long enough to prove that we can produce artists at that caliber or in that many different areas. But you can come through spoken word and be a legit literary poet. And I think we're seeing a huge a generation of folks that are doing that in incredible ways. You can come through and become a performer. You can be an actor. You can be a playwright. You can be, there's so many things that you can do coming through. And I think when we all start and we're all together and we were all young and all the people that I knew, we all thought we were going to be the same thing. And now I'm starting to see everybody doing something different, becoming something different. But I think the thing I always knew that I was going to do even then was to just tell stories. I was never going to talk over anybody's head. I was always going to stand in front of an audience, or maybe write a play or maybe write a movie or whatever, but it was always going to be storytelling and it was always going to be for everybody or as big an audience as were willing to listen to me. And those are the people that I think I come back to in terms of if I have an icon, that's who it is. It's comics who can stand in front of an audience for an hour and tell stories. That's essentially what they're doing. Richard Pryor is definitely one of those people. George Carlin is definitely one of those people. And if not comics, then filmmakers. And so those are the two. If I was to have an icon, it would come from one of those two. Ingmar Bergman. I love Ingmar Bergman films. Woody Allen's name has been mud lately, but I love Woody Allen films, even though, Woody Allen's had his picadillos. I love Spike Lee. I love foreign stuff. I love stories. I like storytelling. And I love when I arrive at the ending and understand how it tied through the middle, the beginning, the breaks, the ups and downs.
The ups and downs. That is excellent. You look up to storytelling. You look up to the icons in the industry, movie or sitcoms. Yeah. So there is this thing. I need to get this law straight. Newton's law. It says, I'm going to paraphrase it.
Okay.
In order for you to go up, you have to leave something behind. So what did you have to leave behind for you to see the gradual progress you're seeing now, or the progress you're seeing now?
Damn, that's a good question. Two things come to mind, but I think they essentially come from the same place. At some point along the way, years ago, people would bring me in on other projects, right? Whether it was helping them to write a poem or helping them to write a presentation or helping them to write a movie. I've been fortunate to work with a couple of production companies. Then they've hired me to help them write movie scripts. And in all of those places, all along the way, I have learned to, when I first started, I kept pushing out my ideas. This is what this thing should be. This is what this thing ought to be. And eventually I had to learn to shut up and listen to what they needed. Figure out how to establish a goal. What are we all working towards? What is this thing supposed to be? What is the outcome? What's the effect? And then put my ego aside and learn to work toward that goal. It's something that I probably would have gained had I, one, studied storytelling or studied playwriting in college or something. Two, had I been in a 9-to-5 job that had anything to do with this, right? Marketing or advertisement or something. When you start out writing spoken word, you're the only person that is responsible for creating it. And they're only 3 minutes long. I know to spoken word artists that feels like forever, but it's really nothing, you know? So you're in charge of the entire process. And you don't think anybody can tell you a damn thing in terms of how to make successful work, you know? So when you find success on that level and after creating things by yourself, you don't think anybody can tell you what's good, what's bad, how to adjust, et cetera, et cetera. When I was, the first project I was hired on to write a film for someone, we would record our conference calls, and then they were automatically emailed out when the conference call was ended. And they wanted to do it because they thought it would be helpful for me to be able to go back and listen to everybody's notes, right? So I would write a section of the screenplay, email it out. Everybody would read it. We get on a conference call. We talk about it. They'd give me their notes, their concerns, whatever. We talk about the next section of the screenplay, what was coming up. And then I'd get the audio so that I could go back and listen to everybody's opinions and make sure everybody's thoughts worked their way into the... And every single time I got an email, every single time I opened that audio file, it was them talking to me going, like an asshole. Or I would say, no, what about this? What about that? And I just realized I was being, not even that I was being a jerk, I was just being young, you know? It came from a place of innocence. But I had to check myself. Even to the point that I needed to stop saying, while you were talking. Because when I'm doing that, I'm still not listening. And I think I'm a good listener. I think I've always been a good listener. But when you're really trying to help everybody move forward, you have to check your ego. And I think that was one of the things I had to leave behind is it's not about wowing everybody with this thing that I can come up with. It's about making sure my ego is not on display. The work is on display.
Peacock.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it's not even that everybody's flashy or that everybody's strutting, you know? But you have to remember that the work is what will last. The work is what we're all here for. So put your ego aside, turn down your thoughts, and let's get to work.
Yeah.
You know?
To piggyback on what you're saying, I remember I went into a room, a bunch of business people, like ladies and one guy, and they were asking, it's sort of a consulting session, and I was asking questions. So they said, "Why are you so quiet?" I'm like, "I need to turn on my light so that I can see you," you know, because mostly what they are saying, I know, you know, but when you start to think, I know this, at the end of it all, like, you learned nothing.
Right.
So it's always good to like put your ego aside and get to listen to what you're saying. So that is something good you had to leave. Yeah. That's amazing. Wow. And now I don't even know what to ask you anymore. You said a lot, but I'll do this. Yeah, I have a sheet here, guys, and what he said mostly answered the questions here. So, though you said you had to put your ego in check.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think you had to do different day in, day out to see progress?
What's interesting is there was kind of a part two to that answer, but it ultimately equals the same thing. The other thing I had to do was to do the work that other people in college or at a 9 to 5 have to do to get there, right? So I had to hit the books. I had to learn about story structure. Mm-hmm. I had to read screenplays and try and figure out why do I like this, you know? Here's a movie that I love. Let's go find the screenplay online, print it out, bind it, and get a marker and a highlighter and go through and figure out what makes me attracted to this movie. Mm-hmm. What makes me attracted to all the movies that this person writes or that this person directs. Mm-hmm. Why does it work? You know, how does it function? It's like popping the hood on a car and looking at the engine, you know? You can love cars and you can talk about cars all day, but until you get a mechanic to explain to you how an engine works, or you buy a book on mechanics and try and figure out how the hell the engine works, you're just out here talking about cars, you know? You're just talking about the paint job. So, and that was another way of putting my ego aside, you know? And I've done that for a long time. I've done it very slowly. I think, had I known better, I would have jumped into it a little harder, a little faster. But, you know, what does it matter? I think I got here, and I think the blessing is that I'm still working with these production companies, that they still hire me, and that I get to be in a setting that is nearly the same setting that screenwriters of the highest order are in when they go in and take notes, when they go in and spitball ideas and come up with things. And, you know, so it's incredible training, but I had to train, you know, both the reading and finding things on my own, learning and teaching myself, but also being in meetings and conference calls and talking about various options. What can we do with this character? How does this work? How do we move this character forward? How do we, you know, break acts and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. But I think it's like homework. It's like going to the gym. It's working out. It's literal training.
Day in, day out.
Exactly.
And to simplify what he said, one, training, he had to keep training. He had to keep reading, and he had to keep finding things on his own.
Totally.
Yeah. That is essential.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, those are very essentials. What is your source of inspiration or your source of creativity?
I get that question a lot, and I never have a very good answer. I think ultimately the thing that keeps rearing its head is emotions. Right?
Emotions.
So I'll be somewhere daydreaming about something, which is not uncommon because I'm a Pisces and we tend to do that. And somewhere an issue, a situation, a relationship between two humans, be them fictional or real, in my mind, something is exchanged that carries with it a certain emotion, you know? Grief, loss, triumph, anger, hostility, resentment, whatever. That, to me, is the thing that I'm trying to write towards. Because I want an audience to empathize. I want an audience to go through an experience through somebody else's perspective. And if I can do that, I think that's the achievement that I'm always looking for. It's not always in the craft of the words. It's in the experience, the outcome, and what I can put another person, you know, what experience I can help somebody else see or move through.
Okay. So emotions are your source of inspiration. You feel, then you create.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is excellent. We are about to wrap up, so let me ask you this: what name would you give your industry? Like, for someone out there who is not familiar with what you do, what name would you give your industry?
It's hard. I think we're going through sort of an identity crisis. People call it spoken word poetry. They call it performance poetry. They call it slam poetry, which it often is, but technically slam is just the competition. You could call it any of those things, and I would be okay with it. I sort of accept any and all titles that I recognize. Some people are sensitive; they don't want to be called slam poets. But I know that most people don't know what slam poetry is, so I take no offense when they use the term. But we are kind of going through an identity crisis. I think at some point somebody's going to emerge with a new title that sort of encompasses all of it. But until then, we'll see.
Okay, talking about titles.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about how you got the doctor?
Hell if I know how I got it. I got hired to write a commencement speech for a college in California. And they called me. No, they didn't. I called them to talk about how they felt about the draft. I sent them a draft of my speech. And I called them to ask how they felt about it. And it was a Catholic university. I had a couple of jokes that played on on religion. I wanted to make sure everybody was good with them. And they said, "Oh, by the way, I don't know if your agent told you, but our president thinks that we should award you an honorary doctorate." And I about dropped to one knee. I was pretty floored by that whole thing. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And do you want to talk about your mom thing when you had to say, hey, they don't know, I know it, but
this is true.
That could be an encouragement to someone out there watching or listening.
It's true. You're good. Nice host move.
Oh,
it was a good host move. Yeah. This is good. This comes from a year of the two of us talking shit at work.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a good this is a good story. So I didn't drop. I didn't finish my undergrad degree. I dropped out, which caused a little concern with my parents. And they encouraged me for a while to go back, and I did not. And I think they're over it now, but it'll probably be a thing for a while. Anyway, so I get this honorary doctorate, or I'm going to receive this honorary doctorate. And I fly out there, and the day before the commencement speech, they had told me originally that they were going to have a rehearsal, and I said, let me know, or whatever. And I don't know if I didn't get an email or I didn't think to ask or whatever, but the morning before, I called them and said, hey, are you going to have a rehearsal? And they said, matter of fact, we're having the rehearsal right now. Come on down. So I go down there. I have my speech on my phone, or I think I took a printed copy of my speech. I meet everybody, meet the president of the university and everybody who's running everything. It was great. And I read a minute of my speech, and I feel so much better. I had put so much pressure on myself, and I just knew that I was gonna get emotional when they gave me this damn degree, or I knew that I was gonna screw up the speech, or I was just kind of a wreck over all the pressure. But while I'm there at the rehearsal, the woman who's running everything, who did a tremendous job keeping everybody together and on point, she says, listen, you're going to get a gift that's in a box that's wrapped. You're going to get your honorary degree, and you're going to get a certificate, and those two are framed. And she said, and if you can take them back with you, that's fine, or we can send them to you. We ship them to you. And I just assumed that they were going to be like the little leather-bound thing they gave me when I graduated high school, or the thing that I, have seen 100 times that my friends received when they graduated college. And I went, yeah, I can fit it in my bag. No problem. Why are you even asking me? And then the next day I get up, we're on the stage, on the dais. I get up, I deliver my speech, and I'm supposed to step aside, and then the president comes up and says, for the following reasons, we're awarding you an honorary doctorate. So they hand me a present, and I'm supposed to hand it to someone else. We had rehearsed this, but we had rehearsed it without the actual items, right? So they hand me a present, and I hand it to someone else so that they can then hand me the honorary doctorate, and then the president and I turn, and we get a photo taken, and then I hand it off, and then she hands me the certificate, and I hand that off, and I don't get to see any of them in the moment because I have to immediately go back to my seat on the dais, on the front row of the dais, so I didn't even look at these things, But the honorary degree's in a mahogany frame that's enormous. The certificate is in this like gold-plated frame that's enormous. The gift was in a box that was this big. And I thought to myself, hell, I can't fit those in my bags, right? Not only that, but they're heavy, they're fragile, So I'm thinking, damn, I got to find somebody and tell them that they do have to ship them to me. And we had all gotten, there on the dais, there are professors, heads of the different departments, faculty, members of the board of trustees, the president, all these people are on this dais, right? And everybody's in these robes, the black robes that you always see. So the whole thing finishes, and people were very kind to me. They said really nice things about my speech, which was very encouraging. And people that had come to watch the graduation, especially dads and uncles and grandfathers, found me afterwards and said really nice things, and it was very overwhelming. And all of us are back in this room afterwards, right? The board members, the trustees, the president, and everybody. And we're all taking off our robes and putting them back where we found them and making sure. And I said, y'all, I do have to get you to send this thing to me, And they said, oh, no, not a problem. Let me get my notebook and we'll write down the address. And she says, she runs off. She comes back. And okay, where are we sending this? And I said, all right, you're going to send it to, and I start reading off my address, and then I go, let's send this to my mama's house. And everybody in the room went, hey, great job. Yeah. And it was just cool, man. Everybody in that moment knew that meant something,
Yeah.
One nun slapped me on the back. It was great. It was like the funniest thing ever.
Well, everybody wants to somehow, some way make their mama or parents proud. And, it feels good when the moment keeps coming day in, day out. Sometimes they may not believe in what you're doing because they don't see what you see.
Right.
All right. So before I went to the title, I wanted to ask you, what are your views about your industry?
Just an open-ended question?
I'll say, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me what you think.
I think I mentioned earlier that spoken word is still sort of new. In a lot of ways, it's specifically slam, which I think most people think of when they think of, maybe not, but slam is a huge part of the spoken word scene currently. And that's because the slam structure grabs kids in high school. There's a high school circuit, there's a college circuit, there's an adult circuit. And because it's a competition, I think a lot of people have broken the code on how to tell a story and how to elicit a response. Within the time allowed in slam, which is usually 3 minutes or 3 minutes and 10 seconds or whatever. I think because we're still a young art form in a lot of ways, I think because most people are thinking about success in competition, and because of that they follow those rules and those doctrines. I think because there's not a financially successful circuit to become a part of, there's not a way to travel around the country, to get your name out there and travel around the country the way there is in comedy. I think we are arriving at a breaking point. I think we're arriving at sort of a new act in the history of spoken word. And at some point soon, I suspect that there will be a circuit, a series of venues all over the country that I can at least go and make a decent amount of money traveling to the other side of the country for a couple of days, do a show every night, 2 nights, the same way there is in comedy. I think that some folks are going to, a couple of folks have already done talk shows, late night shows, and daytime talk shows and that kind of thing, which is really cool. So we're sort of piercing through the that crossover audience, that mainstream audience in different ways at different times. There's a couple of YouTube channels that have become huge, Button Poetry and that kind of thing. So I think people listen to us because we're able to boil an issue down or to get to the heart of a thought quickly. Mm-hmm. I think Mark Smith, who started slams in the 80s in Chicago, they call him So What, Mark Smith, So What. I think he really struck gold when he decided to keep it at 3 minutes because that's how long your attention span is. Mm-hmm. And all these years later, it works beautifully in the YouTube generation.
Yeah.
It can go viral very quickly because you're not requiring someone to sit through something that's too long. When they sit down, they have this sort of internal clock. Once they've seen a poem or two poems, they have this internal clock where they're able to understand, all right, even if I don't love this, I know that it's not going to go on that long, And by the end, I can still like it. Mm-hmm. I can stay and sit long enough that I really like it. So I think we're right at the cusp of something big. I would like to see folks using spoken word in other places. There's been a lot of spoken word theater and it's not been very good. A lot of it hasn't been very good, but some of it has been terrific. And I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see folks using spoken word in different ways and for different reasons. There are damn sure enough of us out here to help everybody get where we're going. Mm-hmm. But I think we've had a really good first act, and I'm ready to break into that second act. I'm ready to see some folks with some success. I debated for years. I've debated leaving spoken word alone. Mm-hmm. I still, some of my income comes from a good portion of my income comes from touring, mm-hmm. and I have so much fun doing it. But really, I go through highs and lows of whether or not that's what I want to be doing, versus writing film and television and plays and making other things. I like making stuff, mm-hmm. So I think I'm here. I don't think I'm going anywhere, but I'm ready to see us, hit that next stride.
Just scratching the surface.
Yeah. In a lot of ways.
Let me ask you, someone out there who's doing the same thing, or starting what you're doing. How do you organize all these things? Just give them some nuggets.
Yeah.
They can, put in their knee and work with.
Yeah. There's a couple of things. One, I think really good spoken word gives something to its audience that they did not have, mm-hmm. right? Just like any good storyteller. For that reason, you have to be growing and learning and maturing and changing at a rate greater than your audience, mm-hmm. I think a lot of folks come into spoken word and they have something to offer, but within a couple of years, they don't, I don't mean that as a slight on anyone. I just mean sometimes, you ain't got nothing left to say. And that's when you got to start working on yourself. So I think for me, and it took me a long time to figure that shit out, I can come up with creative ideas, but storytelling in its essence is about showing someone else how to change, showing someone else that change is necessary. There's just as much famous theater about people who didn't change and suffered for it than there is famous theater or storytelling about people who did change and were rewarded for it, So change is necessary, and if you're not changing, then your art's not changing. I know a lot of young cats in this city and in other cities who have come up to me and said, how do I get better? How do I get better? And really what they're asking is, how do I justify my ego? I got a big fucking ego. Mm-hmm. How can I get out here and show everybody how great I am? I'm not the one to ask, homeboy. That ain't my shit. That's not, that ain't in my lane, and I'm not that dude. And So I think part of it is like you have to figure out how to change. You have to figure out like what am I going through? What are my problems? What can I face? What can I learn from? And then that's essentially what the next story that you have to tell is.
That creates, sorry to interrupt you,
No, go
that sort of brings the uniqueness
ahead.
in whatever you present.
Yeah, totally.
Your life.
And go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I'm done.
The thing that I think is so interesting is when I watch stories being told, I know which ones come from a real place. You know, you watch Big Bang Theory. Big Bang Theory is funny, but I've never learned anything from watching Big Bang Theory. You know, never has there been a storyline that really delved into the human condition. You know, Modern Family used to, I think, strike at things that we all went through. I think Blackish, almost every episode, maybe not almost every episode, but so often, Blackish finds a place that I haven't seen anybody tell a story about. And their batting average is astounding. You know? They get into corners of our shared experience. And I know the show is about a black family, but it's our shared, it's almost all of their stories are about something that I go through, something that anybody goes through, any American goes through. And sometimes they are specific to black folks, or sometimes they are specific to people of color, or sometimes they're sometimes it's one character or another, and they're specific to old folks or young folks or men or women or whatever. But I know that they're doing work in that room on themselves. In that writer's room, those people are asking themselves deep questions because it's reflected in the work every time, you know? I know people, I know when a writer has a great capacity for change and a huge understanding of who they are based on the outcome of that work, you know? And in some way that's one of those things that I would try to convey to the next kid coming up is like, you're going to serve your ego for a long time. The sooner you get past that, the better. Because that's when you're going to start doing actual work.
That is good. That is good. Well, we are about to wrap up, and I have last but one question.
I'm ready.
Okay, Carlos, Dr. Carlos, tell me, let's gossip. You know, we're going to gossip. Any public thing you want to address, anything you want to compliment, any global issue you want to compliment, any celebrity you want to say something about, it's all up to you. Or you can choose to, right after gossiping, you can choose to talk about what you have coming up, or you can choose to neglect any other thing and put yours on the table.
Is there a celebrity I want to compliment or gossip? I don't know. I mean, I think I take every public appearance, take advantage of every public appearance to talk shit about Trump.
Oh.
The worst president in history. So I'm glad I got to sneak that in there.
Shameless plug.
Yeah. Yeah, shamelessly, I'm talking shit about the president. I've been thinking a lot about Terry Crews. You know Terry Crews, the actor? He appeared in front of Congress the other week to talk about his I don't like saying Me Too moment.
I watched that.
It was dope though, right?
Yeah. So, as a black
yeah,
I watched it.
And he was so specific in his language. He knew exactly what he was trying to say. It's just interesting to me how some people are meant to lead a moment. And I think he specifically, you know, he was in the NFL. He dropped out of or I don't know how why he was no longer in the NFL, if they cut him or he had an injury or whatever, but he left the NFL for whatever reason, and I think he really didn't know what he was doing. And I've heard him say that when he got to LA, he was sweeping floors and he was working security, and then at some point somebody put him in a movie, and Ice Cube noticed, and he was working security for Ice Cube at that time. So Ice Cube put him in, I guess, the Friday movies. Anyway, he's just a really interesting dude, and he seems like his attitude had so much to do with his success. But I always thought of him as just a big buff guy in comedies, you know? Be it black or white or any other race, if you're a big buff guy in comedies, I don't expect much depth from you. You know?
Okay.
And then my roommates love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So I came to Brooklyn Nine-Nine a couple of years later, but I think it's really funny, and I think he's great on that show. And I loved Everybody Hates Chris. I thought Everybody Hates Chris was amazing.
Yeah.
Such a great show.
For it to start.
And so I knew of him as being this guy who would sort of, one way or another, climbed through the industry to be this great comic actor. He was also in, what's the Stallone?
The Expendables?
Yeah, Expendables.
The Expendables.
Yeah. And a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, Norris Guest, who passed away, saw that movie and called me and said, this dude's going to be one of the biggest action stars of all time. You know, he just immediately saw that quality in him. But I just never thought he was a deep thinker. Not a deep thinker, but, you know, I just thought he was just kind of this big, goofy guy. And I saw him on The Breakfast Club, doing an interview on The Breakfast Club, and he, like, knocked me out. I was so impressed with his understanding of not just the Me Too movement, but, like, the ways that we affect each other. And I thought, you know, not that anyone would ever wish something like that on someone, but he's such a good representation to speak on behalf of what's going on, you know, of the folks who are going through what's going on right now.
Yeah.
That was crazy inarticulate. And then he appeared in front of Congress, and what he said was so powerful, so succinct. He gave his wife credit for teaching him not to respond with anger or not to respond physically. So I ended up, you know, the last couple of weeks, I've listened to podcasts of his. I've found YouTube videos of interviews, and I don't know, very, very encouraged, very heartened that very heartening that somebody out there like him exists. You know, hearing him tell his story, tell where he came from, how he got where he was, the kind of attitude that he has. His work ethic is bananas. But he also just seems to be a person who enjoys life and is grateful. And I'm happy that people like Terry Crews exist.
Yeah.
Who else do I want to champion? I just finished the second season of Glow, and I can't shut up about it. I fucks with Glow. I think Glow is telling stories that we haven't seen. Obviously, it's telling stories we haven't seen because it's about women wrestlers, but it's just telling stories about women that I haven't seen before. And I'm kind of in love with that, and I don't know.
Wow.
What other gossiping do you?
I personally, I have a lot to say, but I'll keep it to myself.
Have you seen Glow?
No, I haven't. I'll check it out. I'll check it out. And everything he says, it will be in the description, so you can check it out. So let me ask you, what you have coming up, and how or where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just by searching my name, last name Robson, Robson. Pronounced Robson, but spelled Robson. And I'm working on a handful of projects right now. I just finished a new screenplay that I'm very proud of, but because I have a non-disclosure agreement, I can't tell you about. But I'm very, very excited. It's being shopped around with some important people. Who knows if it'll make it anywhere? Statistically, screenplays don't make it anywhere.
Is it about? Oh, that
No.
is different. Okay.
Yeah, that's a different thing. But I'm very encouraged by the response we've been getting from some folks in the industry. I am going to be touring colleges some. I just found out I got into a couple of conferences that will get me some work this year, and so I think maybe one of the challenges that I'm debating challenging myself to write a lot of new spoken word stuff between now and Christmas so that I can work it out on the road. I created last year. I created a one-man show about working in retail, and I performed it as part of the Boom Festival, which is a performing arts festival here in Charlotte. If you haven't heard of the Boom Festival, you should Google it, and it happens every spring. You should come out and hang out and see things and encourage people, and it's really the only festival of its kind in the city. I created the show for Boom with the intention of touring it, and then I kind of set it aside. So right now I'm going back and working on it. It's called Retail Therapy, but hopefully there will be some previews before the end of the year. I'm working on a play that I may or may not use to apply to grad school. And I don't know. I'm always working on some things. Blues and I are working on a one-man show of his. We're working very slowly currently, but we're working. So I'll be producing that and directing it. And yeah, I'm always working on something.
He's always creating, and people do love doers. And it's so funny now, social media lets you see what is going on. People show what you're doing. But there are people underground. There are people in cities and towns and states that are doing stuff which so many people have no clue who they are. But they are the backbone of whatever goes on in the city or in other states.
If the qualification for those people is to be doing and not be on Facebook, then that's me.
Wow. Yeah,
I have a small allergy to social media.
Oh, snap. Sorry.
Yeah.
I have an antidote.
I'm just not on social media like that. I like living my life a little quieter than everybody else.
Yeah. A lot of information.
Yeah.
Oh, snap. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I feel you on that. So that's Carlos Robson.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure.
Nice to see you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks a lot for being the guest here. And as always, I say, someone out there listening or watching would get something from what you said. Though you didn't go through everything you've been through in life, but if someone should hit you up, hey, please, yeah, blah, 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 you can give them something they can use, which will help them. Or someone watching could know that, okay, we are in the same, you would get to know that they are listening to someone with the same mindset.
Right.
They wouldn't feel alone. So I really appreciate you coming here as a piece performer. What do you call it?
Performance poet, yeah.
Performance poet. Yeah. Thanks a lot. And as always, this is Creativity is an Idea podcast, a source of creativity for creative people. And please, don't fuck up. But when you do, fuck up real good so that will help others. I have no clue what I said. But I always say this. I need to probably sit down and understand what I just said. Anyway, fuck up real good to help others.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure,
Make
man.
big mistakes.
A huge bam mistake.
Yeah.
It was a banger.